Wonderful. Can someone on Zoom just give me a heads up that you can hear me? Oh, maybe Rabbi Ryan.
I can hear you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, perfect. So we will get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be studying together tonight in just a minute. But I wanted to just give a quick introduction about who I am. Did you want to say anything before I say anything?
Only to say that I'm so sorry to not be able to be in the building with you all. I sent my kid to daycare last week, and sicknesses have been ravaging through our household. So I am on the mend and feeling better, but not quite better enough to be in the building to be able to be with you in person. This has been a year in the making, truly, of making this happen. And so it's a treat. So I'll let Ariel introduce herself because she is very capable of introducing herself. But just to share that this class and this series that will be happening for the next 2 weeks is just an incredible opportunity for us to gather together as part of our Elul series, gearing ourselves up for the High Holy Days, giving ourselves a little bit of a different flavor of what that preparation could potentially look like. I'm very excited for tonight. I may be mostly with my camera off. I've mustered up enough energy for this, and then I may take a little bit of a rest. But just know that I'm so grateful that all of you are here. I'm so grateful to you, Ariel, for showing up and for being here and for giving the gift of your gifts to our community and being able to share. And so for you to be able to share who you are with us is an absolute treat, and we'll all be very kind and also share ourselves with you. And so this will be just lovely. And so I'm really happy that you're a part of it. And so welcome everyone to our Elul series, our first session. And I'll let you take it away. It's yours from here.
Awesome. Thank you. And as Rabbi Ryan said, this really was a year in the making. But when we talked, I remember it was like instant love. I think we talked for an hour and a half on our first call just about life. So thank you. And I think that's a testament to who this community is. And so I'm excited to get to know you guys, both in the room and virtually. And I want to tell you a very little bit about me, and then get into the crux of this, because I think I prepared probably for a 3-hour session. And so I'll try to keep it to the hour. So my name is Ariel Freetanzer. I'm an end-of-life consultant, and I started this work about 6 years ago. And it was sort of I was going to say like happenstance, but that's not really right. It was the consequence of a lot of different experiences. The 3 that ultimately led to it were that I was doing my second clinical unit as a chaplain intern at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. I was doing thesis research for my master's, which was on Judaic studies, bioethics, and social work. That was my master's degree. It was an individualized degree in those topics. And my master's was on medical aid in dying, specifically within the Jewish community. And I was also unfortunately grieving the loss of my 2 remaining grandparents, and I will talk about them a little bit later. So basically, once I finished my internship, I finished my research, and I experienced those losses. I realized that people were not having conversations about what they wanted at the end of life, and in many cases, if they were even engaging in those conversations, it was happening far too late in the game, and they weren't informed about what their choices were. I didn't even know the terms, and so I sort of set out to change that and to get people talking while they still can. So tonight, as part of this Elul series, I know a little bit about what's going to happen in the coming weeks, but because I'm not a part of this community, I wanted to really, to show you what I do and where I think there's value in terms of the holidays and as we prepare for that. And so tonight we'll kind of touch on a lot of different things. My goal is twofold. My goals. One is to use the anticipation of the high holidays to reflect on life and death, and to really sort of reckon with the possibility that this year could be any of our last. I know that sounds a little bit morbid. Maybe if you read the description, you were prepared for that kind of reality check, I guess. And then the second is to engage with different kinds of texts, not only written texts, not only Jewish texts, but to really explore a lot of different ways that the reality of death can permeate our lives and maybe allows us to wrestle with it a little bit more this coming year. And with that said, with everything that's going on in the world, with everything going on in Israel, I'm sure for many of us, the idea of trying to make death more real is insane, because it is so much a part of our lives. And it's so painful. And whether we came into tonight grieving directly someone that we know and love, whether we're anticipating the loss of someone that we know and love, or we're just kind of experiencing global grief, there's a lot of loss, a lot of baggage that we're carrying. And so I want to honor that and validate it, and empower you to bring it into this space, and also recognize that we have about 50 minutes together from here on out. So try to hold on to things if you can, in terms of sharing to the end. I'm happy to stick around afterwards, and it's such a privilege to be able to hear from people, whether virtually or in person. So I'm here for that. And know that I will also be happy to give you contact information. You're welcome to contact me anytime and share with me, or ask questions. But also know that what you share in this space, again, virtually or in person, stays in this space. I always encourage people to take the stories with them and leave the people behind. So keep it confidential, but take the lessons, both the lessons that hopefully you'll get from what I've prepared, and also from what one another will share. So that's a little bit about me. And we're gonna kind of head off into the text. And what I'm gonna do, and I will share them online as I promised. Can you see that? Not yet, because I can see what you can see. All right, great. So I'm changing this back to gallery because I want to see all your faces. Oh no, I don't know how to do this on an iPad. This one?
I don't know, it might be the screen itself.
There we go. Okay, cool. So everyone can still see those texts, right? All right, so what we're gonna do is we're sort of just gonna move through them. There are a lot of texts. You can turn them over now if you're here in person. There are a lot of texts. I might jump around a little bit, but my goal is to kind of work through one by one. And because, again, we have such a short amount of time, and a lot that I hope to get through, my goal is to sort of read through them, and maybe you'll be able to see a theme, a framework, kind of a structure in the way that I've laid them out. And to open it up, if you have a thought, an initial reaction that you want to share as we once we finish each text, please share it. But then if you don't, we'll move to the next one, and we'll explore from there. And there'll be plenty of time for discussion. But I want to offer that we won't all connect to each text. So it's not like we have to all share something about each one. Do I have a volunteer to read the first one in English?
Sure.
Go, great. Thank you.
See, I set before you this day life and prosperity, death and adversity. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your offspring would live.
Thank you. Any reactions, thoughts? Has anyone heard this before? Have any previous associations with it?
Choose life. I'm certainly very familiar with those two words together in this context.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes they can also be used in other contexts.
Yes.
Right.
It's interesting that it's you and your offspring would live. It's usually just about you.
What do you take it to mean?
Well, if you don't choose life, then you have no offspring. You won't be able to continue.
Wow. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that it's posed as a choice where it isn't always a choice.
That is interesting. I'm trying to look into the Hebrew to see if the way, uvacharta, you choose life.
But people don't always choose. I mean, if someone is unwell, for example, they're not choosing, they may choose to die, but they're also not necessarily choosing to die. You know?
And I also wonder even what that word life means. What is in that scenario specifically? What does living mean? What does life mean? And do we actually have the option to choose? Is it one of those, I think of like voluntelling someone, voluntold, right? So you're being told to choose life, but you don't actually really have a choice, but maybe we do.
Yeah, but it's interesting that it puts it on us to choose, that it's not, because I've always like read or participated in Yom Kippur as if it's decided for me, not that it was a choice that I can make.
Oh, wow.
I've seen this very one used in a book on addiction, on alcoholic addiction, talking about using it before taking the first drink. Once you've taken the first drink, the choice isn't there, but before the first drink, it is. And it is about using your time in life as opposed to wasting it in addictive behavior.
Wow. Thank you for giving that perspective for it. David, I see that you raised your hand.
It comes in Deuteronomy just after the blessing and curses at Mount Gerizim and the other one. But it's sort of saying you've got everything. The curses and blessings cover a wide range of human activity. And although the Hebrew doesn't say anything more than life or death, you have a choice of, in looking at those curses and blessings, you have a choice between life enhancing and death courting or death infected activities. And choosing life, you can choose life enhancing or enriching activity, or you can choose the end. In the end, we all die. So what would you like to do in the meantime?
Thank you for that. And I think that ties into what Naomi was saying about being able to make that choice. And is that next step going to be life enhancing or not? Yeah.
Well, I think also there is in here and in these discussions around death and dying, the sense that even if death is on the doorstep, there are ways to keep living and keep quality of life there to the extent that is possible, so that there's both things happening at the same time.
Absolutely. All right, we're gonna move forward just because there's a lot of text. Again, and feel free to take notes and write questions down. I'm happy to answer at the end. So I throw in the term memento mori in here. It's a Latin phrase. It's used a lot in art, expressions of art, just as a reminder that we must die. I don't go into it too much more, but I think it's an interesting sort of paradox to choose life, but remember you have to die. So I kind of like that dichotomy. Do I have a volunteer for the second text from Brachot? I can do it as well.
I can do it too.
Go for
it. No, you go.
Okay. Rabbi Elazar said to Rabbi Yochanan, I am not crying over my misfortune, but rather over this beauty of yours that will decompose in the earth, as Rabbi Yochanan's beauty caused him to consider human mortality. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, over this, it is certainly appropriate to weep. Both cried over the fleeting nature of beauty in the world and death that eventually overcomes all. Any thoughts? Also, feel free to say if you don't like the text. That's like one of the things I love most about studying Jewish texts and non-Jewish texts is that you have the option to just really not like it. So how does this hit you? Yeah.
I'd like to think that it's not speaking of physical beauty. Maybe it's like the beauty of the person's like essence that won't be with,
Mhm.
with the people who are living anymore. I don't connect to it if he's talking about physical beauty and, you know, that kind of decomposing.
I think he actually is talking about physical beauty because Rabbi Yochanan was known as like a beautiful person physically. But I also understand what you're saying, that it doesn't feel as deep.
Yeah.
Maybe if that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it feels a little superficial. That I will interpret it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. You're entitled. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I'm trying to read the names on my screen and on that screen. Go for it. Just feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, I think I can't tell if it's me you're pointing to.
Yes, sorry, Barbara. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. No, I mean, I guess I'm just struck with how it's really it's our struggle in living that thing, you know, beauty, whether it's physical or spiritual or the essence of a person. I mean, things don't last, you know, and just coming to grips with that reality of things don't last. There's a lifetime for everything, and it is fleeting. And just, you know, like David said, what do you do in the meantime? How do you make the most of life? So it really, I think, just sort of boiled it down to some of the essence of the human condition, really.
Absolutely. It's the temporal nature of all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts before we move on to the next text? Do I have any volunteers to read the poem by Leah Goldberg? You're going to be my go-to. Oh, Myra, are you raising your hand to read or to speak? Both are fine. Did you unmute? There you go.
In everything, there is at least an eighth of death. It doesn't weigh much. With what hidden, peaceful charm, we carry it everywhere we go. In sweet awakenings, in our travels, in our love talk, when we are unaware, forgotten in all the corners of our beings, always with us and never heavy.
Tell me about that, Myra.
Just thinking about what the poem says, the idea of always carrying death around with us as a kind of ephemeral piece of ourselves that we're not often conscious of, but that's always there as either a possibility or a future event, and how it affects us in our, even though we're not aware of it, how it affects us in our, you know, daily comings and goings. It's nice.
It reminded me of that Jewish teaching, and I apologize for not remembering where it's from at this moment, but the idea that people are meant to carry around two pieces of paper in their pockets, one on each side, and one side should say, the world was created for me, and the other side to say, I am but dust. And so, or I'm from dust, and to dust I will return. And the idea that there is this overarching kind of presence of death, if we allow there to be. I think so much of our society says we don't think about it. You know, we think about like anti-aging cream and what it means to be young. And it just, there's so much that really, I think, aligns with the idea that being young or living forever is a good thing. And we don't really allow ourselves to feel the presence of death, even if it might be more life-giving, as David mentioned before.
I'm curious, what is the name of the poem? If you
So I have searched and searched and searched and searched, and I cannot find anything. It is driving me crazy. But I don't even remember how I came upon it. But there are a lot of books about her that reference the poem, but there's no title.
Yeah, no, I just thought the poem might also be a clue, but the poem, the title would be a clue, but the poem speaks for itself.
That's interesting. Very interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that. Any other thoughts on the poem? All right, we're gonna, in person, turn the page. Go to the next one. Do I have a volunteer for this next text? In English. Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
We learned there in a Mishnah that Rabbi Eliezer says, repent one day before your death. Rabbi Eliezer's students asked him, does a person know the day on which he will die? He said to them, all the more so this is a good piece of advice, and one should repent today lest he die tomorrow. And by following this advice, one will spend his entire life in a state of repentance. And King Solomon also said in his wisdom, at all times your clothes should be white, and oil shall not be absent from upon your head, meaning that a person always needs to be prepared.
Any reactions? Thoughts? Good, bad, the ugly.
Well, this seems to me to be a clearer statement than what the poem more loosely refers to.
Can you tell me more?
Not sure I can. I can try.
That's okay.
But this says that you should live each day mindful of death coming possibly the next day, and so it seems to be a nice companion piece to the poem we just read.
I totally agree with this.
Yeah?
Yeah, like I get laughed at a lot in my family because I will frequently bring up the fleeting nature of this moment and that the awareness that it is, all of it is temporal, all of it is temporary, all of it is fleeting, and how good is this right now, and we don't know. Not in a way that I'm always saying, well, we don't, with fear, but we just don't know.
We don't know.
And so for me, the obligation is to cultivate the joy where we can, with that awareness that it isn't forever. I kind of live there.
It's so fascinating that you say that, because I actually just before this moderated a class for Rabbi Shai Held, who teaches at Yeshivat Hadar in New York, and there were about 120 people on this Zoom, and he said at one point towards the end, kind of in passing, that the idea of living every day as if it was your last, he said it's not possible. Like we can't hold both things. You can't live. He said we say it so so commonly, right? We say it all the time and colloquially, and yet if you had to live as if it was your last, how would you go grocery shopping or prepare meals for your kids? Because if you're going to die that day, you're not concerned about grocery shopping. You're not concerned about making meals for your kids.
Sorry, but maybe I am.
Okay,
because
great.
that's an act of love, and that's me here in the world.
Fair.
And so I don't think that you can't do both.
Mhm.
Actually, sorry
Fair.
to disagree.
No, please. I thank you for disagreeing. It was just so interesting that he said it that way, because, and we'll get into some of the texts that sort of say the opposite, that what does it look like to hold that, right? And to be able to live every day thinking it could be your last. What would you do differently if that day, that week, that month, that year was your last? I have answers for what I would do, and I'll share them in a bit, but it is an interesting thing, to just say in that moment, like you said, it's an act of love. Maybe you would make dinner, but you might not make like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch. You might make something more lavish if you thought you were dying that night. I don't know. Or maybe you really they love peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
You don't like green bananas.
You don't like green bananas. That's a really interesting point. I love that. Unless you really love green bananas. Any other thoughts on this text? Yeah.
When my loved one passed away, And I was putting some food in the freezer. I said, oh my God, I should write it in English because my daughter doesn't read. So just in case if I'm gone, she would know what to feed my father,
Wow.
and because I could go and she wouldn't know what it is. I should write it in English.
So it's so interesting.
Mm.
Did that transmit into any other part of your life? Was it just the food in the freezer?
No, it's a lot of things. It was different.
Yeah.
It was the same as a food. You go to the stores, just the same. This is gone, and this is gone. So what do I buy now? Because I never thought to buy something for me. I always buy for them.
Yeah.
Or when I bought the flowers, and my husband was jealous to my mom and I said, well, I have to buy the same flowers because they died 3 months apart. So they won't be jealous. It's silly.
But it's not. And sometimes it's those moments, I think, where grief tends to be the strongest. It's not the moments that we think necessarily are going to be the biggest. Of course, there's anniversaries and birthdays and all sorts of milestones. But sometimes it's those moments of, well, I don't know what to cook anymore because I wasn't cooking for me. I was cooking for them. Yeah. Yeah, Barbara, go ahead.
Just a comment about the text and how it's different than the poem in the sense that this text, when it talks about one should repent today lest he die tomorrow, there's a kind of a bit of a warning or a bit of maybe some fear, or you never know. The poem seemed there was a lightness about it and a kind of the idea that yes, death is with us a little bit, but it had a different tone than the text in terms of it informing you about how you should live. That it was much lighter in that regard.
Ira, were you going to say something? I wasn't sure I cut you off. No? Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on? All right. Do I have a volunteer? Oh, actually, you know what? I'm going to pause because I'm going to play you a song. Has anybody heard of Craig Talman?
Yes.
Great. He is a very good family friend of mine, and I love most of his songs, but I remember the first time I heard this song, I just really fell in love with it. I'm going to share my sound on here and hope that it works as well, and hope that it doesn't play it twice. Even after 4 years on Zoom, I still feel like.
Teach me to number my days. Fill.
Wait, I realize it's playing through here. Okay, hold on. Hold on. It's playing through it twice. Okay. We're hearing it twice, not you. Okay, I'm gonna play it just in the room, and you're gonna tell me if you can hear it, guys.
Teach me to number my days.
Hold on. Oh, yeah. I've never dealt with two computers in the same place. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna only share sound.
It's fine.
And not play it out loud. Okay. Apologies. Maybe if I just turn the volume down all the way.
Teach me to number my days, fill my heart with wisdom. Teach me to measure the ways, to be mindful for each day. Teach us to number our days, fill our hearts with wisdom. Teach us to measure the ways, to be grateful for each day. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha Kadesh Yameinu, Yameinu, Teach me to fill all my days with hope and vision. Teach me to measure the ways, lift my heart with hope and dreams. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Kadesh Yameinu Yameinu
Can you hear me again? Okay, great. Okay, so rather than reflecting on that song, I want Love a Volunteer to read the next text, and then we can reflect on the two of them. Any volunteers? Yes, Naomi, raise your hand. Oh, hold on. Oh, sorry, I muted you by accident.
If you knew you had only a certain number of days or months, or even a handful of years in which to live, you would make very different decisions than you would if you knew you had decades or a couple of quarter centuries. None of us will be spared death. This we know, it should not surprise you. But what is surprising is that an active, embodied, existential awareness of this has the opportunity to be life-saving. This Yom Kippur, let yourself be jolted back into your true self, into the self you would be if you couldn't be here for very long. And then live that self day after day, year after year, decade after decade, for as long as you can hang on.
Any thoughts to this, to the song? Where did it strike you in any way? Do you feel it somewhere? Yes, go ahead, David.
Sorry to descend to the secular, but it's impossible not to think of a novel by John Irving, called A Prayer for Owen Meany, a man who magically gets to see his gravestone, and he knows the day he's going to die. So what it means is his whole life is obsessed with that date, trying to avoid it, trying to obviate it, and of course that doesn't happen. This is the problem with being too literal about the idea of a date, or consciousness of death, or being constantly ready for the act of death. Unlike, I guess it was King Solomon's advice in the previous one, I don't go to bed every night with my talit wrapped around me so that you can just pop me into the coffin in the morning. That literal expectation of death is, I don't think it's particularly helpful. It's simply a matter of being aware in a constant, even if it's an eighth of the weight of the eventuality of death, rather than a specific event, which tends to crowd out, I would think, most of what else you would get to in a day.
And yet you said that you feel like you can do this.
A little.
Is
Yeah.
it acknowledging it out loud for other people? Is it kind of pausing in the moment and saying it to yourself? How do you do that?
Both things, both, because I also am aware that we are such a death-denying society, culture, that naming it is important. I mean, I didn't do this when my children were 6, 7, 8 years old, but they're adults now. And so I feel it's important to normalize it in our conversations. And yeah, sometimes it's just for me. It's my moment, my pause. And I mean, it's not like I'm constantly, but I am frequently, I would say. I got kicked out of this class.
No. Well, I will say there is something that I won't say it's always, I mean, I talk about death a lot, and I think about death a lot, but I always say that if I had a week to live, so I started keeping kosher when I was 16, and I say that if I had a week to live, I would eat fried shrimp for the entire week. That would be it. And then, of course, being in this work, my answer to myself is, you don't know when that's going to happen. Just do it now, get it over with, know that it's done. And, like there are plenty of people who say to me, okay, well, if I know that, that I'm dying, I want to eat chocolate cake for every meal. Or they'll tell me how my mother-in-law always says she wants to be buried in her Land's End nightgown. It's just the little things that if you are aware of it, that sort of in the moment, like you said, if you can share those things in the moment, not only are you bringing a little bit of that awareness back into the moment, but you're also sharing a piece of you with the people who are around you and saying, I don't know when that's going to happen. I know for sure when my mother-in-law dies, she is getting buried in that nightgown because she has said it so many times to us that it's going to happen. We're going to make sure it happens. But if we don't talk about it, it's something that's might be so small. Like you were saying, it's so silly, but it's not silly. It's something that really deepens the relationship. It tells you a little bit about who the person is. You might not get.
So can I just say, like, when reading this stuff, it's not so much what I would do, the eating fried shrimp or the not going grocery shopping. It's more the who I would be. Like, because sometimes I'm, maybe not that nice to my husband, or, something will come out, or I'll say something and it's not my best self. And I think that it is how I would more want to be the nicest and the most loving parts of myself that sometimes fall to the side. So it's not so much what I would do, but how I would be.
Which that takes us perfectly into our next text. Do you want to read it?
Excerpt from
Yes.
The 4 Things That Matter Most by Dr. Ira Byock. A brush with death often instills in us a newfound appreciation for the gift of life. Simple pleasures, a cup of tea, sunshine on one's face, the voices of our children feel like miracles. When we've had a close call that shakes us up, The anger we felt toward people closest to us no longer seems significant. Ill will dissolves in love, appreciation, and affection, and we recognize the urgency of mending, tending, and celebrating our relationships. Because accidents and sudden illness do happen, it is never too soon to express forgiveness, to say thank you and I love you to the people who have been an integral or intimate part of our lives, and to say goodbye as a blessing. These simple words hold essential wisdom for transforming that which matters most in our lives, our relationships with the people we love.
Any thoughts, reflections? Can you speak up a little?
Say goodbye is a blessing.
Saying goodbye is a blessing.
That's huge. When they run through your arms, it's a gift.
I couldn't agree more. And yet we don't always get that choice, right? I mean, we see.
Dr. Joe's brother said, cancer have a big plus. You have time to say, I love you. And it's not always easy. But say it.
Yeah.
And it's
I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people who say, everything from my loved one is sick and they're dying and they're not willing to accept it, or nobody's willing to talk about it with them. I know it's happening, but no one will talk about it. Their doctors won't talk about it. And others who say there might be very little chance of a cure, but the person wants to do everything they can to live as long as they can under those circumstances. And I always say that it's the like you said, it's a blessing in a sense, a blessing and a curse, because so often now we see death is not sudden. Of course, there's tragic death, like what we're seeing in Israel, what's happening all over the world, right? There are accidents. I always say that I think, God forbid, but I think I'm going to die in a freak accident, which is just going to be ironic given how much talking I do about this. But we in many ways see these long medicalized deaths, and we have a choice. Oftentimes that's what catapulted me into this work, to see that people often were going through very long journeys and still weren't having conversations. I know plenty of people who are in their 90s, who are over 100, who've never talked about these things with their families. And I'm not saying that that's the number where they should. I think they should. Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who's a bioethicist and tremendous leader in the conservative movement, says that people should be writing their first advance directive when they get a driver's license. And it's so true. I mean, anything can happen, right? And thank God many of us live very long, healthy lives, but we do have this choice, right? To be able to whether we're going to pursue every medical option, every medical intervention, or we're not going to. We have the choice in many cases to be able to say goodbye and say, you know what, even if tomorrow isn't promised, because it's not to any of us, I'm going to say it and it's going to feel really uncomfortable, but I just want to make sure I say it to you. I had that tremendous gift with one of my grandfathers. And I'll talk about him also in a second. I know we have about 12 minutes left, but might go a few minutes over, but I'm going to try to respect your time. That I remember when he was really sick at one point. I was in New York and he was in LA, and I FaceTimed him. His caregiver held the phone there, and I FaceTimed and I read him a letter that I had written about what he meant to me, and just wanted to make sure I got to say goodbye. And he recovered, and we ended up getting to talk in person and see each other. But I wanted to make sure that I said what I needed to say. And it's a tremendous gift if we take the opportunity. Thelma, did you have your?
Yes, this excerpt really speaks to me. I recently recovered from a life-threatening illness called listeria. I'm sure you've all heard of it.
Wow.
And I learned it. And when I was in the hospital, one of the things they said to me, do I want a DNR? I thought at the time, am I going to die? I was close to death. I was very, very ill. And so when I recovered, and I'm still recovering, but thank goodness I'm alive here to talk about it. And I realized how much we take for granted, how much I take for granted, that I couldn't even take a shower when I came home because I had to get antibiotics through an IV. And I thought, a shower? I mean, it's a simple thing. And I've learned to appreciate and love the people in my life who I haven't loved so much in the past. And I've learned a lot about the meaning of life, the meaning of relationships. So I'm so happy to have taken this, that you're offering this, because it really speaks to me.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're recovering. Okay, I'm going to turn us to the last text, but before we read the text, I want to tell you about this picture. So I mentioned my grandfather. I had very, very close relationships with all four of my grandparents, who were all Holocaust survivors. And my grandma Lucy suffered several strokes, and she was in a nursing home. And my grandfather, in the last few years of his life, was able to, he was also moved in there, and they shared a room until they died. She wasn't able to communicate. So she communicated, but not so much that I was able to play this with her. But my grandfather, I had the privilege of doing so. So can you actually hand me one of those decks? Thank you. So my grandfather, in the last few years of his life, he had congestive heart failure, and he was in and out of the hospital a few times. And 2 of those times he was intubated for 12 days each. So during each of those, we thought, this is it. You know, we planned for that. And I was very upset because during one of the stays, in both cases, he was cognitively sound before going into the hospital. And the doctors asked him if he wanted to be fed for all sorts of reasons that is too long a story. He said he did not want to be fed. And my uncle and my dad, who were his medical proxies, were able to override that decision based on what another doctor had said would be his experience. Again, all details that are kind of irrelevant. But at the end of the day, he recovered, and everybody was very grateful, including me. And I was also very upset because he had very clearly stated what he wanted, and it was overridden, and that's totally legal. There is that is legal in his advance directive, or was, but he didn't get his wishes respected. And I was so distraught by it that I ended up playing this game with him. There were a few other things that happened in the few months, but this game called Go Wish, I wish I had invented it, speaking of wishes, but I did not. It's a game I learned about in graduate school, and I pretty quickly went home and played it with him because it was so important to me that he understood what his wishes were and that he wasn't he was a very stubborn man, very controlling. It was unlikely, I think, that he was going to make a choice based on what his family members wanted, but I wanted to make sure he understood what the options were and what I would say, if he had the perfect death, what that could look like, what the end of his life could look like. So I played this game with him, and basically there are a lot of different ways to play it. They're available here in person for sale, but if you guys want them, feel free to let me know at the end of class. There's 36 cards, 35 of which have a value that someone might choose for the end of their life, and a wild card. And the way that I played it with him was I read through the entire deck and I said, you just tell me if this is something that's important to you or not important to you. And in some ways that you play it, the goal is to narrow the cards down to your top 10. He's the only person I've ever played it with who picked his top 10 on the first try. He knew exactly what he wanted. And so I said to him, I'm going to lay these out on your feet. Oh, sorry, I realized I didn't show you guys the picture. I'm going to lay this out on your feet, and I'm going to take a picture so that nobody can say they weren't your choices. Obviously, if you didn't know what his feet looked like, you could say they were anybody's feet, but our family knew what his feet looked like, for better or worse. So those were the things that he picked. Now, right after this game, he was going into a family meeting at the nursing home. And I said, you just take into consideration the choices that you made. I gave him the picture. I made sure he knew what it was. I think I left the deck with him. And when I got out, when he got out of his family meeting, my mom called me and said, you're never going to believe what he said. Now, a precursor to this was that about 10 days earlier, I had come home for Thanksgiving, and the first night I was home, my mom called, the nursing home called and said that he was really agitated. He couldn't sleep. He was having trouble breathing. And so my mom and I rushed there. We tried to calm him down, and he just said, I want to die. I want to die. I can't keep living like this. Again, he was still sharing a room with my grandmother. She was very much alive. And he went to the hospital. He was fine. But again, 10 days later, we play this game. And as you can see by some of these choices, again, he's very much in control. He already had his financial affairs in order. He wanted to be mentally aware, free from pain, kept clean, to be treated the way he wanted. All of these things were things that he was able to get. But after that family meeting, my mom called to tell me that he had said he wanted to be a full code, which meant that if he were to have a cardiac arrest, he wanted to be resuscitated. And my mom and I could not believe it, because he just said he wanted to die. And now he's telling us that he wants every measure to be taken to keep him alive. What we didn't realize until he died was that the one thing that was most important to him that we could only get from having a conversation was the wild card. And the wild card was the time he got with my grandmother. So in the end, my grandmother passed away on December 23rd of 2017, and he sat the week of Shiva, and he died the night that he finished. And it was absolutely heartbreaking and surreal and perfect for them, because he kept saying, I'll see you soon. Over her open casket, he literally said to her, I'll see you soon. He willed it. He could have survived another few years, and he didn't want to live without her. And so all of these things were the things that he got, because in that last week, we were able to take measures to make sure that he was where she died, which is what he expressed to me in verbally a few days before he died. He wanted to be surrounded by his loved ones. There were 13 of us around him when he died. All of these things were so important to him. And in the end, his doctor came a couple hours before he died and said, he's not in any pain. He could be on medicine. There could be a million things wrong with the way that he was living before. And he is totally free from pain. He's not on any medication. He got all of the things that he wanted because he expressed them to us. So we're going to read this last excerpt, but again, these are not my cards. I just buy them and I sell them because I love them, and I tell them I want to be their ambassador. But the reason I love this game is because it's just an easy way to access that conversation and to say, it's not about what you want, how you want to die. It's about how you want to live. What is most important to you? And even if it's not with these cards, first of all, you can play the game online at gowish.org. I'm going to put that in the chat just in case you want it. But the beauty is that you can just start a conversation, just express what is most important to you. Because as we learned in the end of that excerpt, it's about the relationships that we have. It's not about what happens when you're no longer on this earth. Of course, that's critical. Deciding how you want to be buried or disposed of, or whatever it is you want to do. All of those things are really important conversations. But the decisions that come before a person dies are the ones that leave us with guilt. They're the ones that leave us with heart-wrenching pain. And so to be able to sit and have a conversation about how to care for you as a whole person, that I think is where we deepen our relationships while we're alive. So I'm going to read this one just because it's long. I don't want to put the pressure on anybody. But I'm going to make this a little smaller so you guys can see the whole text. And this is from The Four Agreements, which is not a book about death, I will say. The final way to attain personal freedom is to prepare ourselves for the initiation of the dead, to take death itself as our teacher. What the angel of death can teach us is how to truly be alive. We become aware that we can die at any moment. We have just the present to be alive. The truth is that we don't know if we are going to die tomorrow. Who knows? We have the idea that we may have many years in the future. But do we? If we go to the hospital and the doctor tells us that we have 1 week to live, what are we going to do? As we've said before, we have two choices. One is to suffer because we are going to die and to tell everyone, poor me, I'm going to die, and really create a huge drama. The other choice is to use every moment to be happy, to do what we really enjoy doing. If we only have 1 week to live, let's enjoy life. Let's be alive. We can say, I'm going to be myself. No longer am I going to run my life trying to please other people. No longer am I going to be afraid of what they think about me. What do I care what others think if I'm going to die in 1 week? I'm going to be myself. The angel of death can teach us to live every day as if it is the last day of our lives, as if there may be no tomorrow. We can begin each day by saying, I am awake. I see the sun. I'm going to give my gratitude to the sun and to everything and everyone because I'm still alive. One more day to be myself. That is the way I see life. That is what the angel of death taught me. To be completely open, to know that there is nothing to be afraid of. And of course, I treat the people I love with love because this may be the last day that I can tell you how much I love you. It's a lot. Any thoughts? Reflections? On this or on anything else?
Well, for those who don't get the Go Wish cards or play the game online, there is a resource in Ontario, an online resource. It's called Advanced Care Planning Ontario, advancedcareplanningontario.ca. And it's a full questionnaire that you fill out. And I did mine. My husband did his when we were fully healthy. And then we were able, when we're fully healthy, to have the first conversation with our kids and say, what I mean by this is this, like just to, do you have any questions about this thing here? And the goal is to keep updating it. So when my health changes, I can go back in and make changes on that document. And it's a living document that my kids can have access to. And so they aren't faced with, well, I think mom meant this when she said that. No, she didn't. She would want that intervention. No, I don't. Like it kind of spells, you're able to spell it out where you are right now. And it was very nice to be able to do that with our family when we weren't, it wasn't emotional because we were well. So it's a free resource by the Ontario Palliative Care Association, I think. And it's called Advanced Care Planning Ontario.ca.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. These conversations need to be ongoing. And I don't know any of you. I don't know, aside from Thelma, who shared a little bit about what you're going through now. I don't know a lot of what you're dealing with. And you don't know what I'm dealing with. And that's the again, the blessing and the curse, right? We don't know what today brings. We don't know what tomorrow brings. And so if we can continue to have these conversations, we continue to deepen those relationships. Now, I will say there are a lot of families that I hear of who cannot have those conversations with their kids or with their parents. I have a lot of peers who say, my parents are not willing to talk about this. They're ready to talk about their own plans, about how they care for their parents, whatever. They're ready to do it, but their parents aren't willing to go there. And so I think it's important to find somebody that you can talk about it with. I think the default for most of us is to have a partner or a spouse or a sibling or a child be the person who's going to make those choices, and who's going to be willing to take on those really hard decisions at the end and to have the authority. And unfortunately, a lot of the time we don't have the conversations with those people. So then they find out that they're the ones making the decision. I mean, in that moment, my uncle and my dad found out when my grandfather was intubated that they were the decision makers. And he had communicated his wishes, but I think it's so important to have those conversations and to recognize that if someone isn't willing to talk about it, they're probably not the right person to have as the medical proxy, because it's not going to get easier to make it in that difficult moment at the bedside. So yeah, and the interpretation is almost more difficult. There's a card in here that says to be kept clean. And for many of us, that might be very sort of surface level. I want my body to be cleaned. I want to have baths, whatever, at the end of life. And for some people, it can be to be free from drugs. But that's not something that we would know if we didn't actually have the conversation. So, it's important to just sit down and to have this conversation and to find out who the people are who are willing to go there with you. And to also, again, our point for having this session all together is to figure out how do we then engage with this differently. When we read that liturgy, like you said on Yom Kippur, I've always thought about it as it's not in my hands, right? It's written for me. And I think that's what the liturgy tells us, right? We're trying so hard to change the decree and to do what we can to make our case. I would say to be given another year. But if we get another year and we don't do anything differently, what's it worth? And if we aren't given that year, if we're given 360 days instead of 365, what does that look like? What should change, and who do we want to talk to? Who do we not want in our lives anymore? That's actually a piece I think is not really included in any of these things, right? Who are the people who take away from our lives instead of bringing to our lives? And how do we make sort of a peaceful exit from that relationship and actually deepen the relationships that matter to us? So that's all I have to share with you. I mean, it's not all I have to share with you tonight, but for time's sake, it is. Are there any questions, any reflections? I'm open if afterwards any feedback, if you have any thoughts. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Oops. And feel free, I'm happy to give it to you guys in person as well. endoflifequestions@gmail.com. It's pretty easy. So if I can ever be a resource to anyone, please reach out. This is only a small part of what I do, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Happy to always hear stories, always offer resources if I have them. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to buy these cards and I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
My parents are both alive. They're both in pretty good health.
Okay.
They're both around 80.
Okay.
So they're not going to last, forever. They won't be not open to it, but it's going to be weird. Like, how do I broach this with them?
Great question. And a question that comes up a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Have you had any conversations with them about what they want at the end of life?
Snippets here and there. Like, oh, when I die,
Right. And that's, I think, how most people have the conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
And my dad's father died, and he was like responsible for decisions. And for years and years, even now, like he feels very bad about decisions that he made that he feels made things worse.
So, I mean, that unfortunate as it is, that's a great entree into it. To say, I know that this has changed your grieving process for the decisions that you made that maybe could have been different or maybe not. Maybe
it's like the intubating, and I think that ultimately killed him. So my dad feels that
very
he
guilty.
made the wrong choice.
Right. And unfortunately, he won't know if that, right? He'll never know if that did.
Oh, but he believes it.
Right.
Right.
And I think if saying, I don't want to live with that kind of guilt if I were to make the wrong choice for you. And I don't think you'd want that for me either. And this isn't only about death. Like, this is really about how we relate to each other as we're alive. So, as an example, my dad has always said, my dad wanted to be a clown from when he was a child, and never did it. He applied to clown college, and my grandfather nixed the idea. And so he always said, when I die, I want to be cremated and mixed in with the elephant dung in the circus. He has told us this as long as I can remember.
It's
right?
very specific.
Very specific. And I'm not going to say like religious, but he's fairly observant. The idea alone of being cremated and choosing to do that is different. But I was like, you really want this? Great. And at some point in the last few years, my husband finally said, you sure that's actually what he wants? And I was like, he has told us so many times that's what he wants. And he finally said, he sat down with my dad and he said, your daughter is going to make sure that this happens. Is that actually what you want? He was like, no, of course I don't want that. I was like, my sister and I both were like, you have said that so many times, right? It's like such a simple thing that absolutely we would have executed if given the opportunity. And my husband finally had to like sit down and really have the conversation.
Kind of ironic that it's your husband.
Of course it is, instead of me. I was like, he has said it. Like he has said it so many times. So I think it's really important to say, I I think I know what's important to you, but when push comes to shove, there's really no way to predict what somebody wants. As a chaplain in training, having one of these cards says to be at peace with God, and or to pray. And there's one I think that says to have a chaplain or a member of clergy by my side. None of those are important to me. I want to be that person for other people, but I have no interest in having any of that be part of my story. So, or I would say it's not in the most important things.
So what happens when the cards are in conflict? Like, I don't want to be a burden on my family, and like, I want every medical intervention possible to live as long as I can.
Why do those have to be in conflict?
I mean, your family takes you to the appointments, they live
Oh,
through the
interesting.
stress, they.
Well, unfortunately, the emotional stress of it is definitely, I think that it's interesting because the emotional stress, I think, is there whether they're alive or dead, in a sense. But if they say, I don't want to be a burden to my family, and in this case, let's say you feel that driving them to and from appointments would do that, then maybe hiring a driver to do that, or hiring a student to do that. Like, there are ways to be able to find alternatives. And I will say, like, my grandparents did a tremendous amount of financial planning. Every I was dotted, every T was crossed. My grandfather spoke to their financial advisor every single day. Like, I swear, if he could have lived with his money under his mattress, he would have, but also if he couldn't have it invested, he would have killed him. So he just always wanted to know what he made that day. And
unfortunately, his investor must have been so patient.
He's so wonderful. He's now our financial advisor. He's amazing. I highly recommend. I don't know if you can do that from the States to Canada, but if you ever move there. But because my grandparents died so close together, do you guys have IRAs here?
No.
Okay.
Like RSPs, yeah.
Okay, so right, so there's some sort of investment account thing that has to be transferred, and it did not have enough time to transfer to my grandfather once my grandmother died. So it like went a different way than all the rest of the investments. So they checked every box, everything was meticulous, and this was completely not able to be helped.
Right.
And it's that kind of thing where it's like, oh, like, what a poor guy, right? Like, they tried everything. And so I think it's just fascinating to see, with all of the planning, you still can't necessarily do everything the right way. We don't have control over everything. But I think if you could say, whether it's with these cards again, or with another way, saying, it's really important to me that I give you the life and the death that you want. And there's no way for me to do that through a piece of paper, or only through a piece of paper. I think the advanced care plans are so critical. And it's really critical to have them accessible, or to have a copy of it. But I think to be able to have a conversation with this, to say, like, to have my family prepare for my death. Well, to say that and then to never sit down and have a conversation with your family about it makes no sense. And not being a burden is a huge piece of that. That if you say you don't want to be a burden, then answer the questions now. Like, sit down and have a conversation. It's going to feel really awkward when you first sit down, and then it feels like a game of cards.
Can I suggest that an opener for this conversation could be, I went to this workshop, and we were talking about this, and I realized I know exactly where your will is and where your medical powers of attorney are, and like it's like that just opens a door that, okay, here's where this document, here's where that document is. Maybe at some point we should have a more detailed conference. Like, once you open the door, rather than just calling up and saying, hey, let's play this how I want to die game, might be like a natural segue
I'll
in.
see them for Rosh Hashanah, so it's
a great Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, it's a good time.
And also, I mean, even, I don't know if your family lights Yortzeit candles on Yom Kippur, but, even talking about Yizkor, like, there are openings that kind of give way to having these conversations naturally. But I mean, you could always blame me and say I gave you homework and said you had to talk to somebody about this, and they'll never know. Yeah, it's like you said, it's just being able to say, like, and at the same time, there are families who will still say, nope, not talking about it. I don't want to hear it. 222, we're never going there. And for them, I would suggest the book by Roz Chast, who's a cartoonist. She said it's called, Can We Talk About Something More Pleasant? And it is so funny. And it's all about this Jewish woman who's trying to engage her elderly parents in a conversation about this, and they just won't talk about it. So there are definitely ways, but it can be challenging. I think if they're not resistant to it, I would say start that way of, I just went to this and I thought it could be interesting to, and
You know,
important to have a conversation. now.
also, like, you usually talk about financial planning
Mhm.
rather than the financial plan.
Mhm.
And so planning is an active word, meaning that things can change and the plan evolves and changes. So, that I don't want to be a burden, but I want every measure taken. Well, at a certain point, that may feel different for your parents. They may, once you start engaging in a conversation like this, the second conversation, the 10th conversation, it may change a little bit. And it's a dynamic experience of planning. Rather, it's like, remember, I'm older than everybody, but we were militant about our birth plans. How we were going to give birth, and it was a plan, but like they go out the window, right? They're just like, they go out the window. So it's like a little document to work with, but then this happens and you have to be willing to pivot a little. I think it's the same with end of life. And
I also think playing in both directions can be really fun. So when we played it the first time with my parents and my sister and my husband, so the typical way that the game is, well, not to say the typical way, the way that I commonly play it is that I would have 2 decks, which is why I recommend 2 decks. And actually the organization sells them in sets of 2 because they recommend it this way. But let's say if I'm playing with my husband, I would have my deck and he would have a deck. And I'm trying to pick my top 10 and he's trying to pick my top 10.
yeah.
So like same thing with
Like
your
the-
parents.
Like the newlywed game. Or whatever.
Exactly, right? And so when we played it with my parents, when my sister and my husband and I all went, my parents were only 40% right about our choices, but we were 60% right about theirs, which is still not great, right? But they're really hard choices. People will often look at it and be like, how am I supposed to pick? There's 35 things I want. And it's just interesting to see, like, as the kids, what things really weren't important to us that were critical to my parents, both of where we are in life and financially, what didn't matter to us. And so I think being able to say, like, I want to play this game for you, and I also want to play it for me because I want to figure out what's important to me, and I want you to also know that. And when I have conversations with my husband or with my parents about, they all know what I want my celebration of life to look like, my funeral, etc. But I wanted to have it with both sets because I wanted to make sure that they were on the same page then at the end of life and at my end of life, so that if God forbid they're planning something, they're not butting heads because they got the same information. So, same thing, like you want all the people who are important to you who might have a say in what the end looks like to have that information, and so too for your parents.
Just the last week, I have 2 grandsons, 14 and 11. Just last week, my daughter was explaining to them what's in her will, in my daughter's will, that if they gone, the kids goes to me. When I'm gone, they go to this friends, and after that, and after that, they gone. Where they going to go? She said, going to go to grandma again. I'm alive forever. So they talk about, it's so simple, but maybe because they experience more loss in my family. So for us, like I was telling my daughter, don't throw this away when I'm gone. And she said, write it down on the bottom. So I wrote it down and showed it to her at 10 years old. And I said, look, if your mom doesn't see it, don't make sure it doesn't, like, we talk about, it's like part of it.
It's normal. Yeah.
They know exactly what, and then I was like, because I got a lot of photographs when my parents passed away, and I said, I want to make sure that it's one set. So when I'm gone, you don't have so much, I'm helping you, I'm doing stuff for you, getting rid of the stuff. It's, everything is a little different.
I feel like The content of the course was excellent. You did, but I just feel like you're such a resource and we've barely scratched the surface. And I guess everyone's at different levels and different places and so.
Do you think it would have been helpful to not have as many texts and to really have like
I'd like to hear more of your personal experience and insight.
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like that could alone be hours and hours.
it can. Well, it's interesting when Rabbi Ryan and I were talking about what to do. I have like I wonder if I have it with me, like the kind of a whole repertoire of like different things that I can offer. And so when he looked through, he said like this, and we want this to be part of the series, and so we kind of want to focus on, the high holidays and going into it, and what do we get, like how do we face life differently, having faced it. How do I not have one of these?
You executed it perfectly.
But yeah, I mean, this is not I would say that's why I'm so excited about feedback, because this is the first time I did this. Because normally it's like playing like I did a program actually in Oakville on Shabbat, and there we sat and we played the game, and so everybody was playing it on kind of a laid out version, and then they could also buy the decks afterwards if they wanted. But it was really having a conversation about what it was like to choose and how do we communicate this. And so that I feel like is sort of like my bread and butter program. I don't know, but yeah.
I feel like in your introduction, I know someone who is from the past and they actually hired a deaf doula. And I had never even heard of it. And her just approach to his funeral and his celebration of life was just so different than anybody I've ever met before. And it was just so informed. And I would love to gain more of that kind of like just, the texts were great.
No, honest feedback.
I feel like I need more.
Yeah, totally fair. I feel like an hour is
I
also
know a member.
An aspiring member.
What?
My son's having a bar mitzvah. He didn't want to change things. So after he's finished,
Because a bunch of us have been talking about doing more programming in this area, so I think more programming will come. Are you on like the friends?
I'm on the
You're on the mailing
mailing
list. Okay, great.
I just would like you're I don't meet people like you very often, right? And I just
people who
feel
love
like-
to talk about that.
But just with your experience, like your education, your just exposure to so many people and so many.
You would have wanted to mostly focus on like the actual real life experiences, not the text.
Yeah, like here, like best practices, lessons learned, like.
Fair.
Some people approach it this way, and like when you have this kind of conflict, here's a way I found that it resolves it well. Like
I feel like I could not have done any of that in an hour, but
yeah, I know you can.
Yeah.
But that's why I feel like we just scratched the surface.
yes, absolutely. I am doing a program on Shabbat at I'm gonna say it terribly.
Nariver?
Thank you. How did you know what I was gonna say?
Because I heard.
Yeah. That's not how I've been pronouncing it. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, Nariver. Yeah.
Nariver? Oh yeah, I've definitely not
it's at like on Brunswick,
Downtown,
right?
yeah.
downtown.
Yes.
At 1:30, I think, on Shabbat, and that one is about comforting mourners. So it'll be a totally different session.
I'm gonna see if I'm available.
But
I love that you could just show up at a shul.
I know, right?
No, I know some people who remember. I'm sure you have to register, but.
I have no idea.
Well, these days, I think you have to register to
Fair.
go anywhere
Fair.
in the Jewish community.
Yeah, but it's really a few. And look, if there's, Rabbi Ryan has like information. I'm sure there are plenty of other people in the local area who, can have these kinds of conversations if you guys are looking to do more, but I'm always available. This is sort of my thing that I like travel to a place and do a program. And this
So
time
you came here and you're just hitting different places.
my husband's covering TIFF. So we've come the last 3 years, and 2 years I did a program at Israel. And last year we came with our 4-month-old daughter. So I was really just on babysitting, and now the friends that we're staying with are babysitting while I'm here. So it's I kept saying, I'm going to hire babysitters. And they were like, no, you're not. We want to hang out with her. I was like, okay, are you sure?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really, I'll take
Thank you. Oh, lovely. Perfect. Oh, I'll give you change.
You get to
Don't worry
choose
about
your
it.
I'm gonna
colors.
stop this
Don't worry
recording.
about this. I'm good.
No.
You realize our Canadian dollar is worth much less.
I do. Oh, I don't know if I can, do I stop it or do I just end it? I'm gonna
You
end
just
it.
end it.